We turn now to the Let It Be album, which I've been saying was generated out of the Get Back sessions from January of 1969, but released in 1970, May of 1970. The album itself going to #1, of course, on both sides of the Atlantic. By the time it was released, May of 1970, the news had already gone out that Paul McCartney had left the group and the Beatles were breaking up. The album was originally going to be produced by George Martin, but during January, when everything was going so wrong, he gave up and walked away from the project. So Glenn Johns, who had been been one of the engineers at Abbey Road working with the Beatles, took over and kind of produced one version of what he thought the Get Back, as it was called then, album should be, and the Beatles were unhappy with that for I guess for a variety of reasons. And then it was Phil Spector, who you remember has kind of kept a relationship with the Beatles. He was on the plane when they came over the first time in February of 1964. He was on the plane with the Beatles, remained friendly with the group. Phil would have been seen as a kind of a senior figure to them, even though he wasn't that much older than them. He'd had hits before they'd had hits. He was an American producer who was a big guy in the music business, or at least had been a few years earlier. So he took the thing over, sorted through all the hours of tape, and chose the songs he wanted to use and the takes he wanted to use, and put it on and put together the album that we know as Let It Be. He added string overdubs and voice overdubs and things like that, and that was the source of some controversy in the Beatles camp, especially with Paul, who did not like the song, especially The Long and Winding Road, and the way that Phil added extra voices and strings to that, and that really upset Paul. Was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back, I think, as far as he was concerned. There were for years many other possible versions of this album using different takes and different songs. So if you're somebody who knows the Beatles bootleg market, for example, there are other kind of combinations of different takes and different songs. The Beatles themselves, or the remaining Beatles anyway, released their own version, improved, one would think they must have believed, their improved version of Let It Be, called Let It Be ... Naked, in 2003. And that was mostly so Paul could take all the Phil Spector stuff off it and have those songs the way he thought that they might originally should have originally been released. So in some cases he used different takes, in some cases he used the same takes, but he took the overdubs off. But anyway, the funny thing is that Paul would know best how he wanted the record to sound back in 1969. We listened to Let It Be Naked. I don't know about you, but all I hear are tunes with missing parts. I mean, maybe you don't like the Phil Spector parts, but you miss them when they're not there, simply because you've been listening to that record sounding that way for so long. So, so it goes. Future generations probably won't have that problem because they won't have been listening to it for 30 years before they hear a different version. Interestingly, on this album, Billy Preston guests on piano and organ. That apparently was part of George Harrison coming back after he quit, was to bring Billy Preston into the fold, to have him play, maybe to have a friend there in the group while he was around these other Beatle guys. And the way George has explained it is, when you bring a guest in, everybody's on their best behavior, and it takes some of the acrimony out of the relationships. And in fact, Billy Preston did act as a kind of a softening, had kind of a softening influence on the Beatles' relationship, and they treated each other a little bit better, at least when he was around. The Paul songs on the Let It Be album are The Two of Us, interestingly in AABA form, and really in the old-fashioned Beatles kind of way, AABA with a partial reprise, so it's AABA, BA, a song that at least formally looks back toward what they had been done earlier. Remember, the whole idea here was to get back to their previous sort of rawer sound and not all this big production-y kind of stuff. Let It Be, a contrasting verse-chorus form. We're going to talk about that in one of the song close-ups, so I will save my remarks on that, as well as The Long and Winding Road, an AABA form. in this case, AABA with a partial reprise of BA. This tune, The Long and Winding Road, as I said before, exists in two versions. One without the strings and the chorus, and then you might want to listen to the most recently released version of it. But as I said before, it was the way that Phil Spector produced this up that really caused Paul McCartney to get so upset about the group and the way things were going. Then there's the song "Get Back," which deals with supposedly, according to Paul, deals with immigration. Maybe it deals with Yoko and Paul's sense of Yoko, get back. Everybody's got their own ideas here. I think in many ways it can be kind of related to Lady Madonna stylistically. It's a contrasting verse-chorus song. And again, here's another song that exists in two versions, like a lot of this this Let It Be stuff, depending on which version you get, the album version or the single released version. The John songs we have, Dig a Pony is a great one, and we'll talk about Dig a Pony in just a minute in the song Close Up, so I'll save my remarks for that. Across the Universe is a great tune on this album, but it was actually recorded in February of 1968, and so you may remember that when we're talking about the White Album and the song Julia and some of the other sort of John Lennon songs, I sort of placed Across the Universe back sort of in that era because that's really when it was recorded. Again, one of these kinds of songs that really sort of reveals John at his most sort of vulnerable and peaceful compared to some of the more sort of angry or ironic things that he was doing at about the same time. Another song, One After 909, is a song from John and Paul's earliest days together. Not surprisingly, that's an AABA form with a partial reprise, so AABA, ABA. People like to tell the story. I don't know if it's exactly the first song they ever wrote together, but that's kind of the way the story goes. Again, getting back to your roots, going back and grabbing a song that goes back to when you were sort of skipping school and writing songs in Paul's living room. This is the spirit of what was happening in January 1969, trying to get back to what they were before. Don't Let Me Down, and not included on the album, but was the B-side to Get Back and recorded at about the same time. It's a contrasting verse-chorus song with a bridge. And the Ballad of John and Yoko, which was recorded a little bit later than the Get Back project in April of '69, a single that wasn't on the album. And that's a modified AABA form that tells the story of, obviously, of the wedding of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. That one having a rather interesting form that goes AAAB, AA, so it's like an AABA form with an extra A on either side, and then a tag. Of the George songs we see on this album, there's the George Harrison song "I Me Mine," which, unlike all the rest of the stuff, was recorded in January of 1970. The stuff we've talked about so far, it was not recorded in January of '69, but January of '70, and so in fact was recorded after Abbey Road, when they were thinking about fleshing out the Let It Be album. We'll talk about this one in a song Close Up in the next video. For You Blue, another song that was recorded in January of 1970, another George Harrison song. It's an old school 12-bar blues, a simple verse form. You might look for the sort of small AAB phrase structure you often get in blues. Say that, here's a verse, then say that verse again, then say a different thing, as also often happens in a 12-bar blues structure. And then Old Brown Shoe, which is recorded in April of '69, about the same time as John's Ballad of John and Yoko, and ended up being the B-side of that single. That's an AABA form, AABA, BA, a partial reprise. Of the group tracks, we get a little bit of the song Dig It. There's just maybe 30 seconds or 60 seconds of Dig It on the actual album. The original version is said to have lasted about 5 minutes. So the silliness you get there went on for some time. There's Maggie May, a traditional song the band used to sing back in the early days in Liverpool, a tune that everybody in Liverpool would have known. I've Got a Feeling is a song that John and Paul wrote together, and I'm going to talk about that in the song Close Up that follows. That's maybe the most musically ambitious song on the record. And there's one way in which we can see something happening in Get Back that really harkens back to their more sort of progressive musical tendencies. So even though the project was really about getting to a simpler thing, with I've Got a Feeling, they continued to be a little bit more experimental. And then, of course, the song You Know My Name, which is not on the album, but is the B-side of Let It Be, and as I said before, was recorded in the summer of '67, so right after, most of it had been done right after the Sgt. Pepper sessions, with some overdubs done in the April '69 sessions that produced both Old Brown Shoe and the Ballad of John and Yoko. So having done an overview of this Let It Be album, let's dig in to 3 songs in a little bit more detail in the next video. Let It Be, I Dig a Pony, I Me Mine, I've Got a Feeling. Actually, that's 4 songs. We'll talk about that next.